What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Everlasting Veteran. I am your host, Ryan Landry, aka Wind Talker, coming to you from southeastern Connecticut. I am here with former Army officer, 2nd Cavalry Regiment, brother and friend, George Cass. He has flown all the way up from Texas, and he is here to talk about his military experience, what it was like being an officer, being in a senior leadership role, and his journeys through the military with his wife, who was also an Army officer, and what their transition was like as a military family and now being a realtor as a veteran. Thank you for coming, George. I
Yeah,
appreciate you.
thanks for having on me.
So, the listeners out there, tell them kind of like what was your inspiration of serving, signing up, and when did you join the military?
Yeah, when I entered college in 2001, right? So that was the fall time frame. Went to school at UNC Charlotte. Had no intentions of ever joining the military, honestly. I always had a lot of respect for anyone who decided to serve. That was, brought up with my parents and whatnot. But, September 11th, 2001 happened, and then, we saw all that tragedy happen, and, many of my brothers, ended up, joining the service and whatnot. At the time, I was pledging a fraternity, and we had a lot of guys that were in the RTC program. So, that's kinda how I got started, was meeting other people within the fraternity, and I saw the leadership skills that these guys from the RTC had, the way they would step up and lead and speak in front of people, and just had a mad amount of respect for what they were able to do, and, they were role models to me. So that was, the first step for me to, join ROTC. Now I didn't join Army ROTC right off the bat.
Yeah.
Actually, I started Air Force ROTC, did that for a couple years, and then eventually switched over to Army, but, went through and, ultimately commissioned as a, field artillery officer, and then, got stationed at, Fort Hood after my initial training at Fort Sill and whatnot.
So so you did like the Air Force kind of thing first. Was there a big difference with that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. For Air Force, the leadership's kinda different, 'cause, in the Army, as a young second lieutenant, as soon as you take over, you've got a platoon that, is about 30 to 40 soldiers in it, where in the Air Force, it takes time to get to that point. I don't remember, but off the top of my head, I think it's like majors and lieutenant colonels at some point have that amount of responsibility, over folks, just the way that they are organized. But, yeah, so, we didn't have, like, field leadership type stuff like what we did in Army RTC, so we weren't going out and patrolling and leading
Mhm.
team and squad level tactics, for infantry. But then that was the difference in Army RTC, is that there's a lot of field training that you'd go out and do, and, I enjoyed it, doing land nav and, leading a patrol of
And
either the team or squad level.
speaking of land nav, all right, is does a Army officer versus a officer in as a brand new lieutenant, is there a difference between being able to find your way around a land nav as an Army lieutenant versus a lieutenant in the Air Force?
Yeah, I think so. I think with the Air Force, you gotta just find your way to the office, right, or the flight line, and then in the Army, you gotta find your way to the objective. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit different, man.
gotcha. And I know a
I
lot.
thought you were going somewhere else with that, like you're
Uh,
gonna give me a hard time. Yeah,
yeah, every lieutenant gets us lost once in a while.
right. Yeah.
So, so when you went and you commissioned as an officer, we both served with 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and we talked about in the bonds with 2nd Cavalry Regiment,
Yeah.
and it's kind of one of those things where if you don't uh, serve with them and are stationed with 2nd Cavalry Regiment, it's almost like a different bond within the military,
Yeah.
and a different feeling, and we talked about that. What was your experience with 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and that brotherhood?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, 2nd Cavalry Regiment out in Rose Barracks, Germany was an incredible experience, and, I'll never forget it. The difference is, so as a lieutenant, I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, which is a very large Army base, right? I think when I was there, they were the largest base as far as personnel, on the base, and then eventually Fort Bragg, took that over. But, everyone's spread out, like, in the Fort Hood, Texas area, so, like, People live in Killeen, Harker Heights, Belton, and Temple, which, are anywhere from like a 20-minute drive to a 30 or 40-minute drive for some locations.
Yep.
And even further, so everyone's spread out, right? So you still have events on Fort Hood, and you have events that are like, within that region. So you kind of meet with people and hang out with them there. But the difference with, Rose Barracks, Germany, and being in 2CR, like all the social functions that you would have were like in, different German towns, right? So like
Hmm.
Amberg, Onspot, or yeah, Amberg and whatnot. And so you would go out and you'd see other people that you served with and kind of like, hey, you want to have a drink or you want to go have coffee, have dinner? And
Right.
so the bond that you had was much tighter. Like Rose Barracks, Jeremy has all of 2CR on it. And so it was just very different, like the bond that you would have since, you kind of just had each other to hang out with. It wasn't a post with hundreds of thousands of people on it. It was a
Right.
post with maybe what, like 400 to 500,000 or 4,000 to 5,000 people on it.
400,000 is a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I share this with a lot of people, and everybody kind of gets it coming from 2CR.
Yeah.
And it's been 13 years since I left Vilseck, Germany, and I still keep in contact. You're here. We talked about Major Matt Simons and his time, and how awesome he was, and
Yeah.
other leaders in which we've had senior leaders or equal peers. Throughout the military, we learn from each other, but we're in it together. We're sharing the same experience, and you're in a foreign country, and not speaking a lick of German, but,
Right.
you come to surprise that the majority of the people around military bases speak very good English,
Right.
and everybody thinks, oh, how'd you navigate around there? Well, the world's different. It's not, sheltered countries where they don't teach another language. We're at the disadvantage because, I can only speak English
Yeah.
somewhat. But you pick up on the language, you get to know the locals, um, and what it's like in their culture, and it's a good eye opening experience. I was there for about 4.5 years before coming back stateside, and I loved every single minute.
Yeah.
Being, and there's a lot of guys, we talk about Paul Deese,
Yeah.
Father Time, that stayed with Second Cav for like
Forever.
forever.
Yeah.
They had to force citizenship on him,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
He was with them forever, and there's a lot of people that do that
Yeah.
because of the atmosphere and the culture in which Second Cav creates. And I'll see people around town, even here in southeastern Connecticut. They either have, Second Cav bumper sticker. There's one guy that's in Norwich locally. He has his license plate, and it's
Yeah.
Second Cav. There's a sense of pride, of serving with that unit.
Yeah.
Now,
For sure. I've seen a lot of people like, since I left 2CR, like, when we were there, we thought we were like a good unit, but not necessarily great, right? Because you kind of look at your own faults and kind of, try and focus on that to get better. But like, when I left that unit, I've seen other Army units and there's some great units out there, but the bond, like what you're talking about, the brotherhood that you
mhm.
have in Second Cavalry Regiment is like no other.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of people strive to try to get that duty station.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Korea assignments. There's something special about those assignments that you get. That I don't understand because I wasn't there, but I understand. Similarities with the bond with
Yeah.
Second Cav. You're going through the same stuff, and especially when you have such a tight unit, and then you deploy with them.
Right.
Because you come back and that tight unit is even now stronger. And I talk about brotherhood all the time. It's a very important thing to strive for, especially when you get into a point in your life when you transition and that 24/7 brotherhood's not around you anymore.
Right.
You get back home and you feel like you're dealing with the transition by yourself sometimes. You
Yeah.
know, now what was it like being a officer and starting a family with another person that was serving?
Yeah, yeah. So, back when I was in Second Cavalry Regiment, I took command of the HHB and Field Artillery Squadron. Couple weeks before that, my wife took command of an FST, so she stood up forward support troop in First Squadron, um, and honestly, like when we first did it, we we were single captains, or I'm sorry, we were without kids at the time,
Hmm.
and married. But then, yeah, so like it was kind of helpful that we could kind of bounce ideas off of each other being dual military, and we understood what was going on
Yeah.
with the other one. You know what I mean? Like, so if I was gonna be working late one night because of some field exercise that we were trying to get ready for, she understood,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And and the same thing would happen with her. So like early on, it was good, without having the kids there and whatnot. But then, eventually we ended up changing command and then moving to Fort Irwin, worked there for a little while as OC, and same thing. Like we were still, without kids. We didn't have kids until we ended up going to Fort Hood, Texas. That was the last go around for me. And yeah, once you have that first kid, it changes everything.
Right.
I mean, the military supports you with, having the kid through like the coverage, and then, gives you some time off, paternity and maternity leave.
Right.
But then, yeah, once you're getting into it, you're like dual military, someone's got to drop the kid off, at like what, 5:30 in the morning when the daycare opens up. Then you go to your, PT formation, do accountability at 6:30 and get in some physical training and whatnot,
Yeah.
and then carry on through, with business throughout the day, kind of like normal. But then, kids get sick. So it's
Right.
always the balance, like when you're in a dual military relationship, all right, who's going to go pick them up? And it's not always as easy as saying, like, well, you got them last time. It's more kind of balancing where am I at in my training cycle with the unit that I'm in, and, who can respond better. And you go pick up the kid, and your chain of command normally like helps you out with it, but as a leader in the military, you set your bounty to those soldiers. That
Right.
doesn't end. You
Right.
know what I mean? So like if you aren't doing it during normal business hours, someone is going to step up and kind of carry on with whatever you would normally be doing.
Right.
But at night, you're still getting like briefed on what's going on and everything else because it's your responsibility. So it doesn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, they don't, it's no fault to anybody that hadn't served before, because, if you don't walk in the same shoes or similar shoes, you're just not going to completely understand it. And there's a lot of struggles, and adversities that you face being dual military kids, or, there's even people that, you're military and you go somewhere else and your spouse gets ordered,
Right.
and that happens. They try their best to keep you guys together. But at the end of the day, you sign a contract, and you're in the military. It's God, country, family, and sometimes, it's hard because family ends up coming last most of the time. And you have to have that mindset to power through and work as a team. Now, when you were with Second Cav, you deployed with them. What was your deployment like ramping up? And then, were you together? You were married just prior to deployment.
Mhm.
So you obviously mission readiness, things are ramping up for deployment. What was your transition like now as an officer, with this newfound start of a family, then deployment and coming back?
Yeah, so, just kind of the sequence of that. So, before the Afghanistan deployment for 2nd Cavalry Regiment, I was on their second one, to Afghanistan, and, so we restructured it as what's called an SFAB, so Security Force Assistance Brigade. They have them now, 5 of them in the active army, but back then, a brigade combat team would restructure, to have SFAT so that they could advise, the Afghan army, um, on whatever their specific trade is, right? And
Hmm.
so, that's what we were restructured. My wife at the time, she was not in 2nd Cavalry Regiment. She joined us at the end of the deployment. So, she was in 12th Cav, so it's the aviation brigade that, was in Germany at the time. I
Okay.
believe the brigade headquarters is still there. And, so we 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 met back in 12th Cab when I served there before I went to 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and eventually I moved over to 2CR, and so that was what we worked through during the deployment. Was I was deployed with Cavalry Regiment, and Michelle worked out with 12th Cab that they sent her a career course. So it's like, what captains go through. So, officer with about 3 or 4 years of experience, they go through that training to kind of learn what they need to do to be a staff officer. So she worked it out with her chain of command since we agreed to send her back stateside, do career course, and that would provide an opportunity, but not a guarantee,
Right.
to get an assignment to 2nd Cavalry Regiment with me. So
Yeah, and
that's the merit, getting married and how do we
right.
work this and get together.
Right.
That was like the struggle. Then she had to go through the assignment process to work it that on the back end of my deployment, we would be back together. And there's what's called the Married Army Couples Program in the Army, but I don't know. I don't know the program structure. It's mostly just folks that are at Human Resources Command
Mhm.
working to try and get these two people together and whatnot. But it's not a guarantee.
Right.
So, like in that case, it took like a general officer at Human Resources Command to sign off on it and approve it.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of dual military couple where
Yeah, a lot
you're
of
not
people
always
don't.
stationed together.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that. There's a lot of dynamics that go into
Yeah.
keeping a military family together when it is a dual military couple. Because mission readiness and the needs for whatever branch that you're in
Right.
come first. Rightfully so, because mission at hand, whatever. At the time, we had the Iraq and Afghanistan wars going on.
Yeah.
Um, you know, but it's a big thing where people don't realize those trials and tribulations in which you go through, even when you end up having kids and trying to structure your life where family comes first when you're home,
Yeah.
in your house, but a door, you we're going to formation when most people are waking up, so
Right.
so then you got to drop them off at daycare before the sun's even up.
Yeah.
So what was your deployment like with Second Cav?
Mhm.
Was it exactly what you figured it was going to be based on orders coming down? And what changed that you had to adapt to as you went on?
Yeah, I think we had a good idea what we were going to do going over there. So my job was to advise a brigade level major in field artillery in the Afghan army, like how to integrate fires. And so when I went over there, they already had like a lot of processes in place for
Mhm.
that, and they had built a relationship. And so yeah, that was pretty straightforward when we went over. Partway through the deployment, I ended up transitioning back to field artillery squadron, and over there, I was a part of like descope and reduction of the fob, right?
Mhm.
So we were at Forward Operating Base Walton in Kandahar. And so that was our responsibility, was to just kind of reduce everything that was there. And there were a lot of patrols that were still going out of that fob on a daily basis in the greater Kandahar area
Yep.
and whatnot. But yeah, I think we had a pretty good read on what we were going to do prior to going.
Yep. And as far as like your transition back, when you decided to expand the family, make the family bigger, and I talk about transition a lot. What did you guys go through? Because obviously you had to come back stateside at some point, and then as a family now, and having kids, um, that transition can be very difficult. What did you guys have to do, kind of set up, not just mindset, but like physical aspects of being able to come back stateside and getting your family established back in the United States?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you got to move all your things back. So my experience was a little bit different. So coming back from Germany, I ended up getting stationed in Fort Irwin, California. So it's the National Training Center where brigade level units go to do their culminating training exercise. Certify them as ready to deploy and whatnot. So I went to go work there, and yeah, I didn't have, honestly, any issues like moving over. There's sponsorship programs, so like when you're gonna get assigned to your next unit, your sponsor reaches out to you or you reach out to them, and then they work the details of helping you with that position,
Mm.
coming over. So at the time then, like we didn't have kids yet, so yeah, it was a good transition. honestly. Yeah.
I had a little bit of Cav, being part of the boss program,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
and better opportunities for single soldiers, helping run that program and also helping soldiers they're just coming out of AIT to the unit, or they're going from another duty station. It's because sponsors, and there's people that listen that they don't understand acronyms or what a sponsor, it's not
Yeah.
it's not an AA sponsor, like, which sometimes, maybe they need one, but
Right. Yeah.
but it's a life sponsor, it's a kind of a life coach, career coach of being able to transition into the unit as you get there. Which sometimes can be difficult. You're going from mostly United States born bases, in your stateside, and then you get that overseas duty station, and there's could be a culture shock. Navigating stuff, military bases is pretty easy because they're all kind of set up the same,
Right.
but you leave those gates and it's like, okay, does that say 65 miles an hour? No, that's
Right.
kilometers, even small stuff like that, and you jump on the Autobahn and you got a hatchback flying past you at 120,
Yeah.
Um, so once you got back, deployment, you went through your deployment, you got back stateside and stuff, you guys end up having kids. A lot of military couples go through it as far as transitioning out of the military, and a lot of listeners or people on the civilian side don't understand the complexity that goes into being dual military and having kids, and that transition out of the military. What was that like for you, and what were the steps that you had to take being dual military and,
Mhm.
and having a family that you started?
So you're talking about transitioning out and becoming
Yep.
a civilian. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to plan it out correctly, right? There's so many layers to it, right? You got to
Hmm.
think through like, my kid's going to be in school. Where are we going to settle down? What career field do I want to change to? What career field does my spouse want to change to?
Right.
And, what locations would work for both of us, right? So, um, I think anyone going through transition, whether they're married or not, it's an incredibly hard process,
Right.
right? It's doable, of course, right? But there's stress involved with it. Um, but
And that's
so
the transition stress we talked about,
right,
and I don't want people to get confused. The transition stress is completely separate than military tied disabilities. Whether
yeah,
it's and a lot of people talk about, it's not a disability, or PTSD, drop the D, post traumatic stress disorder. We don't have a disorder. These are names that come up, with from psychologists or whatever the case may be. However you want to handle it, and accept, your transition stress or your PTSD. It's those things are two separate things, and it's
right,
based on, and we talked about it yesterday. That transition stress can become overwhelming. You know,
yeah.
how did you guys deal with it as getting out and kind of doing your steps?
Yeah, so what we did was like, you're looking for the certainty and things, right? And like part of it is financing, right? Like you
Hmm.
got to have, money coming in. And we're used to getting paid, by the army on a routine basis, right? Twice a month. And so when you're looking at it, they say that it takes about a year to transition. It could be longer too. Like if you plan it out and do all the different
Right.
steps. So like when, dual military couple says that they're going to get out, um, you for us, what we decided to do is, leg out of it. Like Michelle would, get out first, and then like a year later, then I would get out, and that's
Right.
how we would try and synchronize. And hopefully, it worked out where you wouldn't get deployed, and you could keep the same school system for your kids while doing it. So for us, what we did was Michelle, dropped her paperwork, and then started the process of getting out about she transitioned, and amid her transitioning, we also moved from the house that we were in Killeen to Belton, and
And that's down in Texas.
that's down in Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, so like both of those, Killeen's immediately outside the Fort Hood area.
Right.
Um, 10 to 15 or 20 minutes drive to post from where we were at in there, and then Belton's about a 30-minute drive.
Gotcha.
But we moved to Belton for the school system,
Mhm.
for our kids long term. And working that out, like when you're, financing a house, like, you've got to have steady income and sequence that move properly. Otherwise, you'd both go into, two brand new careers and then they're not going to finance your house.
Right.
Right. So that's kind of like tied to like what you're looking at when you're transitioning. So, and then you also have to figure out career works for you, in the short term. So Michelle, had to figure out a career that would suffice for like the local area that we were in because I'm still stationed there.
Yep.
And then, on the back end, then we, worked through me. So like once she got out, it was probably like 4 or 5 months after that that I dropped my packet and then started the transition process. For me, it was a shorter timeline. I did like I think I was trying to time it where 6 months it would get approved and then I'd be out. But it ended up working out that it got approved 4 months out from when I wanted to leave because I was about to get PCS on the back end,
Right.
so relocated to another post.
Yep.
Had I not gotten that approved,
Yeah.
so like there's a lot of facets to it to figure that out to
Right.
try and
And
stabilize yourself and whatnot.
we talked about this yesterday, and when the Army down at, back in 11, 12, 13, they started doing like a downsize, involuntary separation is what they're calling it because the Army was downsizing. They're kind of, closing bases down, overseas in war areas and stuff, and you talk about, putting it 6 months out, hoping to get it approved, then things happen where it gets approved in 4 months. And with me, I set myself up for success. So, the onus on a veteran, you have to do everything possible. You can't just be placing blame, when you become lazy and don't take the initiative yourself to get out, right?
Yeah.
So the onus of being able to transition and the responsibility of being able to transition out of the military responsibly, there's some of it is on the soon to be veteran, right? When you separate from the military, some of it's on us. But I talked about the TAPS program and the transition assistant program, how it got introduced in the 90s, before 9/11, and then obviously 9/11 hits, and it's all about mission readiness. We're going to war, so the program wasn't touched again, hasn't been touched as far as the transition aspect goes. And for me, I had a year and a half left on my contract. Orders to go to 101st Airborne, do air assault school, airborne school, and I knew that the Screaming Eagles were going to be up on a rotation to deploy again. So I'm like, I haven't been back in 4.5 years. I'm gonna go back stateside and then choose the transition out once I'm back, in the U.S. However, they told me if I don't reenlist for another 3 years, at least, I run the risk of them, Big Army changing my ETS date by 365 days, which they did a year and 3 months out. I was already PCSed, and then I had 3 months to, ETS now, and then get out and figure it out. And for me, I started communications with the recruiter at the department that I'm at now, a year prior to that, just because and and I would be getting out. It's just a matter of when the timing was within the next couple years. So for me, I all of a sudden decide to ETS. Well, the military told me I'm ETS, and so now I have this list, and they tell you this is where you need to be, this is where you need to go. I have to schedule appointments, what works best for me. Turning your stuff in, getting your stuff prepared to be shipped back to the US, because you're not putting everything as a check bag.
Right.
You're throwing stuff in tough boxes, and your household goods and stuff like that. And I was considered a single soldier, so I lived in the barracks. But there's people that are considered single soldiers, but their family just didn't go with them.
Yeah.
So your responsibility of moving stuff back to a different duty station is a little bit more minimalized because you don't have, a full house,
Right.
to move from one country to another. They do a pretty good job as far as packing you up and getting you out of there,
Germany, they did great, man.
Yeah.
They packed that stuff better than I would have wanted them to. I was like, "Man, you're working too hard, man." You
Yeah,
know?
those
I don't know
trucks,
what is it
yeah,
about there.
those moving trucks kind of sketched me out though because it had the soft sides on either side.
Right, yeah.
Like, how are they going to secure this thing?
What if it falls out?
What if the load shifts?
Yeah.
Just kind of seeing like
Better
what.
have good insurance, I guess.
Right, right, yeah. So, so then I transition out, come back. I have ETS leave, which typically people have. You got your 30 days.
Yep.
You're still technically part of active duty, but they're giving you that 30 days, to figure it out. And we talked about it before. I mean, being realtors, you got to have the proof of income that you're having stuff in, and if you're going to go and transition, bank's going to look at it and go, well, you're leaving the job.
Yeah.
Why are we going? We don't know if you have another job and you don't have, a amount of months or years established in that role
Right.
to say, hey,
It's normally 2 years. They want to see 2 years of income in that specific field, right?
Yeah.
Or something that's similar.
Yep. And
Grades,
they become a little bit more, sticklers when it comes to government financing, VA loans type of thing.
Yeah.
And if your transition is even 6 months, you're now trying to look for that house and in the area that you want to do,
Yeah.
be in, and operate your family and your life after the military, but we both know that even if an offer gets accepted, you're looking, at, 7 weeks out, to maybe 3 months. That's if an offer gets submitted, inspections go well, and everything else. So the transition time of actually finding a place, a location to live and settle your family, great, you found the place. But, even when they start that process of paperwork, you still have to go through the checks just like everybody else, of approvals, loan commitment, and that takes time.
And you're doing that amid transitioning out of the Army, trying to get gainful employment that kind of matches the income that you had already, from the Army, and a skill set that you don't necessarily doesn't translate precisely with what you were doing, know?
Yeah.
I mean, there's always like to me, like, there's the managerial skills that we as, leaders in the Army learned, and a lot of that translates and kind of the discipline that we have, that purpose-driven feeling that we have that we're gonna, kind of push through whatever barrier to figure it out and do a great job of it at it, so, but yeah, it's hard.
I think there's a disconnect though when it comes to understanding a veteran and their roles that they were in. We talked about this, stepping in as, not an NCO yet, and then becoming a sergeant, stepping into the shoes and the roles of, writing TOCSOPs, standard operating procedures, and helping with that and mission readiness. And that's the administrative back end, and it's tedious and time consuming. And it has to be like, spot on, cross T's, dot the I's, because that's what gets pushed out to the rest of the unit to be able to follow as a guideline for mission readiness. And they, I feel like there's a disconnect when it comes to, we talked about the DD-214s. The only people that can really read those, and they only fit a certain amount on there, all the schools that you attend, awards, and they don't even tell the backstory of what those acronyms for those awards are, how you got them, the work that you put in, the hard work that you put in to achieve whatever rank you did, whatever awards. And, I feel like the sense of accomplishment coming from getting the award, because you have such that strong structure and support within your unit that you don't need to, like, I accomplished this because you have such that support going on. People see you working hard and you're rewarded for it in passing, and senior commanders and enlisted, recognizing and actually telling you, hey, this is an awesome job. And to the point where they go, I'm putting you in for AAM, an ARCOM or whatever the case may be, and, for me, it was kind of a struggle, because I put in all this hard work, fast tracking the sergeant, and doing it at a pace others have done it before,
Yeah.
You put in hard work and effort and you're rewarded for it. And then you come into the civilian world and it's starting all over again, and trying to explain, the tasks you had, and they just don't understand, unless it's a government job or you have a former military person looking at your DD 214, which you
And
have to,
understand it.
right,
Yeah, what it says. Which I mean, like even like guys that are in a different skill set, like they might not know what it says. My DD-214 has a bunch of fire support schools that
Mhm.
are specific to an artillery officer.
Right.
Like not everyone knows what that means,
Right.
right? And not all of it translates. But
Yeah.
I think like the general skills, like any like I said, any transition is going to be hard regardless. It's not an easy process for people going through it, but like I do think it is on the soldier, to figure out, what resources do I need? Do I transition? And a
Mhm.
lot of it is in networking, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Finding the people who've done it before and then talking to them. So like us, right? Like people should be
Right.
reaching out to us if they're transitioning and they need help, to figure out like, well, how did you do it?
Right.
And get their advice, right? And
Yeah.
then like a resume is a good example, right? Like a soldier should be making a resume, right? I think they have you have the general resume that has everything in it, and then there's a targeted resume specific to whatever career field you're going into the
Mhm.
exact job. So like when I built it, like I had I don't know like 3 to 5 different people looking at it, but from a variety of backgrounds. So I had veterans that had transitioned from the military into a career. Um, and then I've also had, civilians that have no idea anything about the military to
Right.
look at it.
Right.
So if you have, a diversity of different views on it,
Yeah.
they can kind of help you out, through
Yeah.
that process. But like it's people that's gonna, help you
Mhm.
get through it and just searching for those folks. I think LinkedIn is a great resource now. Not
Right.
everyone's on LinkedIn, right? But there are enough people that if there's a specific role and company that you're interested in, you can just try and connect with them and, see if they,
Right.
help you out with the interview process and kind of just filling out a resume and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. And we talked about it before, and you made a good point as far as having others look at it. And I think that's part of what needs to be part of the overhaul of like the TAPS program.
Yeah.
That transition program is they need to have people in place. Whether they decide to overhaul it and push for the change where you come back, especially if you're overseas duty station,
Yeah.
your boots on ground back in the U.S.
Yeah.
No more than or no less than a year before you're about to transition out, because
Right.
like we said, there's so many layers of transition to be able to get out and get those ETS orders and things getting approved, medical clearance,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, and having I talked to Rob the Warrior Stratus, Rob Garcia out of California, who I've talked to and hired as far as PR and pushing this so that more people are aware of what my mission is.
Yeah.
And we've come up with some great ideas of, having maybe a life coach kind of counselor, even after your official transition, you get that 14, whether it be for a month or 3 months after you're already out, and already have civilians that are prepared and know what a military structured resume looks like, so that you can gear yourself and show a potential employer how valuable you are,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, we can't change the employer's views or knowledge. They, as in the civilian sector, have to know that, hey, these guys, whether it's, they call them door kickers, 11 Bravos,
Yeah.
13 series with artillery, pull string, go boom,
Yeah. Gun
you know,
buddies. 50 Bravos.
gun
Yeah.
buddies, 13 Deltas, FTC, and nobody knows. They look at the title,
Right.
field artillery, and they go, well, I talked about this on one of the podcasts I was on. They look at my title and they go, well, that's not going to apply to anything in the civilian world. But they
Yeah.
don't see, the awards and leadership and stuff where it has prepared you to be a mid-higher level manager and in that echelon in the civilian world to be able to manage people properly, be a leader, or be part of a leadership, which is completely separate from being a boss, right? Because leader or leadership is not a monetary amount; it's a title which others view as.
Yeah.
And that I think the military does very, very well when you go through these classes of warrior leadership school, WLC, senior leadership school, and the same thing on the officer side. They prepare you. You're elbow deep in everybody's lives, especially having security clearances and stuff. Are their credit scores good? Are they faulting on stuff? There's a lot more in depth that goes into having, especially clearances in the military, of making sure those ducks are in a row so they can maintain their clearance for that job. Because if they lose it, they can't do their job.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize how elbow deep you are in other people's lives, being in a leadership role. Now, when you got back to Texas and you reside in Texas now, you guys kind of transitioned out and become a realtor. What inspired you to get into being a realtor and business owner, and kind of dive into that? We talked about investing.
Right.
Kind of dive into that. I want listeners to kind of know, like, hey, you don't have to do it always by the book, and if you're going to be your own boss or have your own schedule, the work ethic that needs to be put forward.
Yeah. So I'm going to start back to when I was a lieutenant at Fort Hood.
Mm-hmm.
So I deployed to Iraq in 2009, right? So this was just after the housing bubble, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't even know that stuff was going on because I was so busy with training and everything else.
Right.
And I ended up meeting a guy that was talking about on the tail end of deployment, like that he was going to buy a house. And before that, like I was used to, being in college, living paycheck to paycheck,
Mm-hmm.
barely having any money.
Right.
And then, I would call my parents like every once in a while to, say, "Hey, how are you doing, mom, dad?"
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually they would ask, "Well, how much money do you need?" Because they knew I was really calling to help
Right.
me out. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So, I need like 300. They're like, "We'll give you 4."
Having
Right.
the 20-year-old Honda Civic that keeps breaking down,
Right.
type of thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I was used to. I was never used to having any money to invest in anything.
Right.
But when you deploy for a year, all of a sudden your expenses stop, right? You're focused on the mission, and then that bank account starts growing.
Right.
And so coming back, talking to this other guy about buying a house, he said, "Yeah, the housing bubble just happened. Now they're offering an $8,000 tax credit if you buy a home." So I ran the math, and then it made sense, and I was like, "Okay, let me buy a home and then move into it." So I bought a home, and then like 4 months later, ended up getting PCS orders to relocate to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for career course, right, as a captain.
Mhm.
And so ended up keeping the house, renting it out, and kept renting it out like for as long as as long as I've had it. And so what I also started doing, like when I went to career course, I had some time to learn like stock trading and everything else.
Mhm.
So like I've been investing in a little bit of everything like my whole life since then.
Yeah.
So
Not putting
stocks,
not putting your eggs all in one basket.
right, right, yeah. So stocks, bonds, index funds, mutual funds. I've dabbled in cryptocurrency. I even built like a crypto rig. I don't know if I told you that. Like I built this,
No.
I never built a computer before, but I built a computer and had it like mining crypto and everything
really?
else. So
You were
yeah.
one of those Bitcoin miners, huh?
No, Ethereum.
Oh, Ethereum.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Bitcoin's like there's this different rig that you got to get, and like I think in that. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
So like I try a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah. Have a miner's hat on when you were doing this, like
Yeah.
with a pitchfork, kind of like the guy in Super Mario Brothers,
Yeah.
like
No. No. But anyway, so like I did all that. But across the years, like all the different things that I've invested in, the most reliable asset I've had is that home that I bought when I was a lieutenant, when I
Right.
finally had some money.
Yep.
And wasn't really thinking through like, long term what this was gonna amount to. But it ended up doing well, and you could kind of understand, what's gonna happen with it.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking earlier about, homes don't ever go to zero, right?
Correct.
The land
Yeah.
is worth something, the house, the structure is worth something.
Yep.
And, with, other assets like stocks and, index funds, you don't necessarily where all that money
It's a
is gonna
tangible,
be.
yeah, it's a tangible that somebody can't take away from you.
Right, right. It's
You
the
know.
price of whatever people are willing to pay for it,
Right.
right? So anyway, like, I just felt like, that was a better asset to invest in. So, continued to, I ended up moving back to, Fort Hood years later. And I moved into that same home when I did go back to Texas that I
Mhm.
had originally bought as lieutenant. Only this time I had my wife,
Right.
and then we had our kids there. So like full circle is kind of cool,
Right.
like raising my little boys, for that 1 year in that home and getting to come back to the home that I originally bought, as a lieutenant and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, so we ended up buying a couple more properties after that, and started going to real estate investor meetup locally to Fort Hood.
Mhm.
And this is kind of also as I was thinking about transitioning that I started going to these meetups, and kind of the mindset that I saw with the realtors and the investors was similar to what I loved about the military,
Right.
where they're very purpose driven. They're all about, having the motivation to, create generational wealth and all that, and kind of set goals, kind of go after those goals, fail along the way, learn from your failures, but
Yeah.
continue to pursue that goal. And then you meet the goal. Now we need a new one. And so, like, I don't
Right.
know, the mindset of the realtors and the investors that I met was right on par with what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think eventually I started getting some mentorship from a local realtor, and was interested in getting, pursuing my license. And so yeah, I ended up getting the real estate license, and then from there, I've started back in November of last year is when I went active, and like uh, it's overwhelming amount of stuff to start a business, like as a
Right.
real estate agent, like
Yep.
you know how it is. There's so many different things that you gotta do because you're wearing the hats of, the CEO, the accounting and finance guy, right? And
Right.
then marketing, sales
Yep.
conversion,
Yeah.
client servicing. And so, but I like it because like there's so much to learn, it never ends,
Right.
right? And I'll admit it, I'm a workaholic. Like
Mm.
I do enjoy just like working.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I'm pretty lazy.
Are you? Yeah.
Yeah. No, like
Mr. Police
uh,
Officer by night and then realtor during the day.
yeah,
Yeah.
realtor by day.
Among like podcast hosts and everything.
Yeah, everything else.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I relate with you and others as well. When and we talked about this morning at breakfast of managing you're your own boss. When you become a realtor or have your business, you're your own boss to manage the time in which you have in place. And with my like LLC, I have multiple different facets in which go into it of investment, real estate investment, snow plowing, web design, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I
And
can't imagine all the stuff that you do, man.
yeah,
That's
and
crazy.
well, we talked about,
Yeah.
you gotta kind of break it down, especially, then being a realtor and working as a police officer. I'm sitting there and I go, I could either overwhelm myself and try to do everything all at once. You have to become very good at time management,
Yeah.
because if you start overwhelming yourself, you end up eventually shutting down, and you don't reach any would put in place for anything.
Right.
And I started in with this podcast, when I first originally was going to drop the first episode, I got some of that overwhelming um, sense of I'm not going to be able to do this because I'm putting so much effort into so many different things. And then I stop and
Right.
go,
Yeah.
I need to, I got one more thing, which is fine. Now I have to figure out when am I going to plan to do this? Break it down and have my 8 hour work shift, or if I get held over, having a plan in place to go, all right, I'm going to do an hour or two of real estate. I'm going to do an hour or two of podcasts. I'm going to do an hour or two. Or if it knows he's going to go look at houses. So I dedicate my time to plowing and making money doing that.
Yeah.
That's a side hustle that it already time managements itself because nobody's driving around during a storm. right?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so it would be stupid for me to give up because when we do have storms up here in New England, it is a very good moneymaker in a short period of time.
Yeah.
It's liquid money. You
Right.
know, everybody needs, if they don't want to go out and snow blow or shovel, they're calling the plow guy down the street to come move their snow.
Yeah.
And I don't get out and salt. I didn't get into the ice management aspect because I talked to other business owners and networked of what their downfalls of being in an ice management role with insurance purposes and
Mm.
people coming after you for not properly
Properly,
salting.
really?
Yeah, it's a thing. Even though
Wow.
a Walmart down the street outsources their snow removal, but they also have ice management where that company salts for them in the parking lot of the sidewalks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, now people can sue Walmart, but they can also sue the company which is responsible for making sure that nobody slips and falls.
Right.
Right. So
That's great.
yeah, it's like it's inevitable. Like you may slip and fall, but
Right.
we're in a world now that everybody wants to sue everybody else.
Yeah, it's a litigious society,
Yeah.
man. Yeah.
How much can I
Yeah.
make off of somebody else's failures? And I feel like we see that a lot of times with any aspect, doesn't matter what job you're in or what you're doing.
Yeah.
We have this as a society, this negative aspect of, how can I make money off of person based on their faults and what they've done wrong instead of looking at the good stuff. You
Yeah.
know, now being being an officer and being in the military, we talked about leadership roles and a boss. The differences between just being a boss and then being a leader. Which is a role that doesn't have a monetary amount. It's a view which others see you in. And they kind of, I feel like getting out of the military and dealing in the civilian world, people try to like blend the two together like they mean the exact same thing. If you have the role as a manager, you're automatically a leader. And it's one of those things where
Yeah.
we go to the schools to lead soldiers and also manage their personal lives, their military lives, and everything else. um, do you see getting out now in the civilian world, has anybody said to you, well, what it's like in the military, and they never served?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we have this thing that I've heard so many times of, well, this is how we've always done it. you know what do you see as far as what holds back any type of organization or business when they have that type of mindset?
Um, yeah, I don't know. Um,
How does it like kind of make you feel that, because I know talking to other veterans, and me personally, you get to the point where it's like, well, why do you keep trying to compare this to what I was doing? You
right.
have no idea,
Yeah.
and you almost get offended in a sense.
Yeah.
um and you station and let them kind of understand your roles in the military. But I feel like a lot of times, because there's a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of our roles in the military, um sometimes we may be undervalued.
Yeah.
And have you run into that, and seen that as you're getting out, transitioning out, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I don't know if I really yeah, I've talked to other people who, that were, like, going into the next job, like, they have, those, yeah, leadership skills, um, and, like, yeah, I don't know if I'd be good at articulating the difference between managerial and, like, leadership, but,
Hmm.
like, I think part of it is charisma.
Right.
Like, I've worked with some leaders that I would say are charismatic where, oftentimes when you talk about leadership, right, of an organization, they end up talking about culture versus climate, right?
Right.
So culture is something that's deeply rooted in the values of an organization, right?
Right. Right.
And generally, accepted practices of how you do things, right?
Yep.
And every unit has their own culture, right? And then the climate is, set by the leadership and through a strong climate, they can impact culture. But sometimes no some leadership climates aren't going to change the culture within an organization.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, like with a charismatic leader, where they're able to exhibit a leadership climate that actually changes the culture within the organization
Mhm.
to make change
Yeah.
for whatever they need.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, as far as transitioning, out, with civilians and whatnot, if they view it the same way.
Mhm. Yeah, 'cause and it's kinda hard, like, and we gotta kinda put in perspective and be more self-aware as veterans as
Yeah.
well. And I've found throughout the years that, um, I the struggle I had is, one, you get out as a veteran and, you're trying to your frustrations with the transition stress that you're going through, um, and you feel like there's a lack of understanding of who you are now.
Yeah. I'm with you on that.
So
Yeah.
there's a disconnect of, people aren't understanding who I am now. I'm a changed person.
Right.
Well, deployments or not. I mean, I deployed to Afghanistan. There's many other people that have multiple deployments.
Yeah.
I know people that they've deployed 6 to 10 times.
Yeah.
And different deployments: Somalia, Africa, Afghanistan, Iraq.
Oh
And
yeah. The
there's
army's all
so
over
many,
the
yeah,
place. Yeah.
so many different deployments that go on, and we can do a whole nother episode about the differences in deployments and how it affects people coming back from those deployments as a veteran, transitioning back into the civilian world.
Yeah.
But one thing I've found is a common thing between all veterans in the veteran community. You initially have that feeling of lack of brotherhood, because the once brotherhood that was there 24/7, it's there, it's still there, but now it's spread out more. It's not in your face,
Yeah.
where you turn around and the guy that fights, with you to your left and your right are right there with you. And we talked about the really good bonds in which you create at Second Cavalry Regiment. It's like no other.
Right.
And we also talked about um, when you get out, you kind of almost lose your sense of purpose.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm
And
I'm with you, man, on that, man.
yeah,
Yeah. So someone asked me recently, I was like, where did this come from? Like, so someone asked me that, like, what's the hardest thing of transitioning? And I gave it some thought,
yeah,
right? And to me, the hardest part of transitioning from the military into civilian life is just that, your purpose, right?
hmm,
Like everyone talks about what's your why, right? What's your purpose? That's what drives people. If you can figure out
yeah,
your why, then the how is easy, right? I think
yeah,
uh, Jim Rohn like said that or something.
hmm,
But when you're transitioning, you've had your why for what? 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years,
hmm,
plus 20,
right,
25, right? And it's been the mission, right? And focused on whatever you're doing in the military.
yeah,
And so when you decide to transition, you've got to think through like what you're going to do on the back end. And so but the purpose that you have has always been the mission, has always been supporting your brothers and sisters to your left and your right, and they're still, fully focused on that.
yeah,
And at some point, for you to do the transition properly and take care of yourself and your family, you've got to stop working toward the mission.
yeah,
But when does that happen?
right, yeah,
Like how do you figure that out? And like I
yeah,
think that's the hardest part is figuring out your purpose and, being pulled in every which direction with what you should be doing because you need to spend a certain amount of time towards whatever your actual job is in the military, making sure that you finish strong and take care of your, soldiers that you work with.
mhm,
And then you also need to prepare to become a civilian, right?
right. A
um,
lot of
and
dynamics
follow that
going on.
purpose. But what
Yeah,
is that purpose? There's some soul searching and mindset stuff you got to work on to figure that out, right?
yep,
So, like, what am I going to do next? Some people already know. Where am I going to do it too? Like, am I going to be moving?
yep,
And so, once you figure that out, what you want your next purpose to be, great. Now you got to continue to transition, and you're going to be continuing to do your military job you're focused on self-development towards your next job, right, or purpose.
Mm,
But then you're also, at the end, normally people put in their VA claim,
yeah.
right? Veterans Affairs claim. Um, and so now you've all got all these medical appointments that you got to go to,
Right.
right? And no one wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go to the doctor and have them like poke and prod me and we do
Right.
all these different
Yeah.
things, And so you have that intermixed with all these different things as far as your purpose.
Yep.
And most people in the military, the soldiers that are still continuing work, like it's busy, man.
Yeah.
Especially if you're an officer or non-commissioned officer, like it doesn't stop.
Yeah. And I
You
think
know?
that's a big thing with transition as far as an overhaul that needs to be done
Yeah,
is you're still attached to a mission readiness group. And you need to be physically detached
yeah,
from that group because their mission's carrying on. Your mission has now changed. Your mission is
yeah,
different. And you have to start that transition from soldier to veteran, or marine to veteran.
yeah.
I don't know what they call them in the Air Force.
Airmen.
Airmen, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like they actually have ability to fly, without a plane.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that's a big thing as far as purpose goes, because we talked about this is how this podcast came about. And I talked to you about my transition. I took one uniform off and put another one on.
Yeah, you went straight into
you
the
know
police department. Yeah.
yeah, and I didn't have a chance, and I still don't have a chance to kind of turn off um the self-awareness,
Right.
mission readiness type of thing,
Yeah.
because there are times where I'm dealing with high stress situations. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not like being on deployment where you're
Yeah.
constantly dealing with people that just hate you, um, and fighting for your life or your brother's lives, and I think that with that transition, there needs to be more of a follow up, when it comes to the military.
Yeah. And everyone's experience is different. Every post is different, right? And you've been saying TAP. So now it's called SFL TAP. So Soldier for Life Transition Assistance. Essentially, they're saying you're a soldier for life and we're going to support you, right?
Yeah,
Um, my experience at Fort Hood was a positive experience with going out. The resources are there, I
Yeah.
think,
yeah,
right? But I think it's on the soldier to properly network with different people to figure out
yeah.
what that actually looks like. And it's not easy.
Yeah, and
It's not easy for
I agree
anyone.
with you. We talked about it. The
Yeah.
onus is on us.
Yes.
But there are aspects of the way that going into the military changes your mindset, changes who you are,
Yeah.
and it has nothing to do with like when you have that transition stress. It's not the adrenaline feels highs of deployments and
No.
stuff. It's a completely separate thing, and it's completely separate from your service connected disabilities as well.
Right.
And it's one of those things where it's during that period, it has to be dealt with 100%. That needs to be your full focus
Yeah.
of transitioning properly. And I talked to one of my good friends and veterans, and I say this all the time, and because it stuck with me. I wrote it down, and it was just a simple phone call, phone conversation I had with it. And he says to me, he goes, "You know what?" And I helped him through some stuff, and sometimes we don't take our own advice when we give it out, right? So he tells me, he goes, and this really sat with me, and it helped me, because there's certain aspects of the military that you talked about when you go to turn in your gear,
Oh
and
yeah.
you think about where I'm putting this pouch, and for Major Simons it was, where am I putting my hot sauce?
Yeah.
And a chew.
Dip, yeah.
Priorities, right?
Yeah.
I'll leave a magazine behind and make sure that I at least have my hot sauce.
Right. Yeah.
But he said to me, he goes, it wasn't until he made a conscious effort to want to effectively transfer, right?
Yeah.
And that stuck with me. That was huge, because there's a lot of people that there are certain aspects of when you transfer, you have to peel back some of that uniform and be vulnerable, because you're stepping into now a world that changed around you, and you're mission, your purpose, and everything else is changing, and there's
Yeah.
so many different layers to it. But you have to acknowledge it, and it's not like a mission readiness. These are our orders. This is what we're doing. If things change, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
The transition isn't spelt out, you know,
Yeah.
nor is it ever going to be completely spelt out because everybody's transition's different.
Well, I mean, the uncertainty is, I think what keeps people from doing it, right?
Right.
Like, because like you're in a unit and you're, if you're thinking you want to transition, you're going to be talking to your buddies, right?
Right.
In the unit.
Yep.
Because you don't really know other people outside,
Yeah.
necessarily, unless you have someone to reach out to that's transition.
Mm.
But like, for the most part, you'll especially guys that like hit their 10-year mark, right? Men and women who hit their 10-year mark, that's normally the decision point,
Yeah,
right?
you go in depth.
10
or
years,
not.
I'm either going full to the 20 to get a pension,
Right.
and I'm pursuing that, or I'm out. And then, so, a lot of people, they just don't know what it would look like if they got out. They don't know the amount of income they'd have. They don't know where they're going to live.
Right.
What's going to happen with their family. For like, we were talking about the stresses of like, dual military couples with kids.
Right.
But like, imagine if you're, married with kids, your spouse doesn't work, they care for the children,
Mhm.
and you're getting out.
Right.
You're the one making the money.
Yeah.
I think that's even more stressful,
Right. Or
'cause-
if your kids need special programs, special needs.
Oh yeah.
Like
yeah.
there's so many.
Right. And now that's provided in the military, for the
it's-
most part. Yeah.
And then once the military says you're no longer under contract, it's on you to figure it out. I mean, granted, yes, it's your life, right? let's stop being around the bush, and sometimes we need to put a big boy and big girl pants on,
Yeah.
right, and say, I need to get this done, right? Stop allowing society to dictate to you when I can't do it no more. I need somebody else to help me. And you start pointing the blame to everything else besides you. It's something you need to say, I need to self-reflect. Am I doing everything possible to make this transition the best possible? If you are, then obviously there's another avenue or a different approach that you need to take. I think that, there should be more resources in place to help with that. And how great 2CR is and military and brotherhood and stuff. It's just like any other job. There are really bad, like personal management type of I lived with a slob, that just constantly pizza boxes, we have room inspection and, my corners, and you have to have your bed tight like you were in basic area IT,
No,
but
generally,
it just said generally clean. It's a hygiene inspection, rightfully so, because they don't need a bunch of people getting sick or mold growing or, and there's a certain level of discipline that needs to continue to be in place, for mission readiness, especially with the group that, getting ready for deployment, pushing off, and you have to have those leadership, sergeant major, first sergeant, that stuff in those roles of saying, all right, get this shit in order or I'm booting your ass, and there are people that join the military because they couldn't figure it out in life. Then they join the military and their life went a full 180, and
a lot of people they join.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like you find, I even had people that I get out and I transitioned into a National Guard unit. A month later, October 2012, I didn't have to check in until November for my 30-day leave. And talk about going from mission readiness, the structure, everything being in place, to guys are there 1 week in a month, 2 weeks out of the year. They're either there for college, extra money, but their purpose and drive isn't there for the unit, and I had a struggle with that. And that's the reason why, like, I got out of the National Guard, one, because I had to drive all the way to Rhode Island, get off of work in the morning, drive to Rhode Island, drill for the day, come home, get a few hours of sleep, go into work. I mean, granted, I could take military leave, but it doesn't pay, right? and it became a struggle with me of like, this isn't the same anymore. When we
Yeah.
talked about having that feeling of the service and my purpose has now changed and it doesn't feel the same anymore. And you kind of lose lack of interest, just like changing any other job.
Yeah.
And military members go through it as well. But I think that a big thing, with transition, we talked about it, is the onus is on the veteran. You have
Yeah.
to take responsibility for stuff, but at the same time, nothing's going to be perfect. They have 200,000 veterans a year transferring out of the military. VA is backed up where they're making decisions for disability 120 to 150 days out from getting the paperwork. That's already after you submitted or went to your doctor's appointments to establish your claim or reevaluation, from the time of intent to file to the time of actually filing it, to the time of them reviewing it. And then
Yeah.
it's like 120 to 50 days, sometimes longer, because there's so many people transferring out.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's your opinion on how that, obviously in this conversation, we're not going to be passing laws today.
Right.
But what's your opinion on what maybe some of the aspect that could help a veteran when they're going through that transition, dealing with the VA? They've been out for a while, and now it's 7 years, 10 years after being out of active duty, and you're trying to get that support from the military or a government agency like the VA. What are some of your opinions about what a veteran do better to kind of stay in the right mindset?
Okay. Yeah, I think going back to, I mean, it starts with whenever you make your plan to transition,
Right.
you gotta start going to your doctor's appointments. Like
Yeah.
everyone in the army, like we're not trying to hide stuff, but like, if you got a bad back or a bad knee, like if you can just tough through it, you do it.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to
Yeah.
go to the medical appointments.
Yeah. They tell
Right.
you, they give you Advil, drink water,
Yeah, exactly. Drink
Yeah.
water. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
So like as you get closer, though, all that matters because it's going to be in your record, right?
Right.
And that's going to affect the VA claim where you can get help with that medical ailment that you got, right, and compensation for it.
Yeah.
So like that's like one of the questions I ask. Like I've had a lot of people reaching out to me now since I've transitioned out, and people who are thinking about doing like looking to advice. And
Hmm.
number one is like who have you talked to about it already, right?
Right.
And then the number two is like, have you started going to medical appointments, right?
Yep.
But I think it starts with that. Like anyone who's serving, like as you get closer to transition, you got to start going to the medical appointments to get
Right.
help,
Yeah.
prior to getting out.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, if you got a back injury, it has to do with nerves and stuff. Taking Advil and drinking water, it doesn't mean that it's going to
Right.
solve the issue. That's
No.
that's been the at least I know the Army's way of dealing with stuff. But I've talked to other veterans across other branches. They give you the ibuprofen 800s, and tell you
Yeah.
to drink a bunch of water, and you're like, it's the shit still hurts,
Right.
like what are we going to do? Like an X-ray? Or you're just going to go poke and prod and
Yeah.
be like, no, you'll be fine, and I think there should be a little bit more in-depth research into the injury and do justice for the veterans so that when they get out, they're, let's face it, the VA, it has its flaws just like anything else, but when you have, the time to be able to at that duty station before that gets out, properly make sure that the injury is documented to the best of your ability for MRIs,
Yeah.
X-rays, because when you go through the process of comp and pen and dealing with it after the fact, when you're already out, now you're on a wait list of 200,000 plus people trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And it gets backed up, right? You can't get it. It's going to happen with the amount of people transitioning out. But I think the onus should be on unit in which is preparing you for that transition,
Yeah.
to make sure you don't have to do extra work, a year long of documentation to then make sure it's properly documented. You in the beginning set that foundation. And if the injury gets worse, then obviously you need to go and have follow-ups and stuff like that. But I think laying the groundwork as a veteran, getting your mindset right from the beginning, knowing it's not going to go your way all the time,
Yeah.
and stop pointing fingers, work the problem, figure it out, push forward. When it doesn't go your way, you're just going to throw up your hands and give up? Or are you going to push forward and make sure that you're heard, your injuries are properly documented? And it's not always, just about like the money and disability and stuff, but when
It's
you,
the care that you get at the end, because
yeah,
then you can go to a VA hospital and get care for that,
right,
ailment,
right,
whatever it is.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And
Yeah.
I think you just brought up the point about care. I think a lot of veterans feel like they're forgotten. You end up in this place of sometimes loneliness, hopelessness, where you're on post and you go, I am sick, or I have a scar on my chin from when we are doing PT and stuff, playing trash can football,
Yeah.
um, and they immediately go and they throw some stitches in it. And it's right before my mom's wedding. So it looked super cool. They don't even trim it. They just let it hang out like this.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously it's documented in my record, and the scar, isn't healed and it's not going to heal. But all those services are immediately available within that day. You don't have to make some crazy appointment in the civilian world, especially with COVID that happened. People's appointments then were being pushed back and everything else that we've never
Oh, yeah.
dealt with
Yeah.
before.
I think it was called 9 elective surgeries, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were all getting
Yeah.
pushed back. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now you have that 2 year period of injuries veterans are dealing with.
Yeah.
They're trying to be just seen by a doctor. I'm going to push back, but they're still dealing with, and we talked about being a police officer. I have to take all my problems, leave them at home, go deal with other people's problems. But then when I come home, those problems still exist.
Yeah.
And I feel like veterans go through a similar thing of I go to the doctor's appointment. It's hopeful in the moment. You're talking to them, this is going to happen. And then a year goes by because that's how long sometimes it takes for
Yeah.
decisions to be made, and
Yeah.
you get into that mindset of, well,
Yeah.
fine, I'm just done. I'm not gonna go to the doctor appointments. This is taking too long.
Right.
I do feel like there's a sense of abandonment in a sense,
Yeah, I think, and that's a good point, man. Like, so if you have something going on with you, right, like a back injury or like
Right.
knee injury, it's not that quick to get moved up to the next level of care, to so to speak, right?
Mhm.
It takes time to go to the provider. If they have to establish that yes, you have a problem with your back, you have a problem with your knee, whatever it is, right?
Right.
And then some level of care before they send you to pain management, and then get x-rays done and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So it means that that soldier's got to go not just to one appointment, they got to go to multiple appointments,
Correct.
right? And somehow they have to sequence it where they're going to do it outside of field training exercises.
Correct.
Which that's another thing. I don't, talking to civilians, like I don't think it's common knowledge, like they think deployment, when I say thank you for your sacrifice as a soldier, right? They're thinking like the deployment, right? But just being in garrison, back, at your home station
Yeah. On
and
post.
training,
Yeah.
getting ready for deployment is, I don't know if I'd say equally as hard, but it's hard because you're
Yeah.
trying to balance out, being in the field, like, any given unit. I mean, probably in a year's time frame, you're probably spending what, 3 to 4 months of that
Yeah.
in the field away from your family,
Yeah.
right?
Total.
All consecutive, but yeah,
Yeah.
total spread across that, right? And then to include at some point you go to a CTC, right? Yeah, like NTC or something like National
Mhm.
Training Center, and then you spend a month away from your family,
Right.
right? And then there's the TDYs that you go on for training and all that. So like all that adds up, but that's what makes it hard. Where are you going to go to all of your appointments in there to the doctors
Yeah.
and get it seen properly, where you get upgraded? it's
Yeah.
tough because, like, like I said, like, I was talking about transition, but even when you're in the army,
Hmm.
like, and you don't have any intention of getting out, like, your purpose is not to go to doctors, right? So
Right.
the problem is, like, soldiers and leaders, they'll prioritize, their field exercises and getting ready for them and doing the best that they can and
Yeah.
whatnot over their own self care. And
Yeah.
that's a tough fight to make. Your soldiers, go and take care of themselves. Sometimes,
Yeah.
it kind of does take that leader to ask those questions, like, "Hey, how you doing, man? How's your back? How's your knee? Blah blah." Right?
Yep. Or
And
even
then
even if you
figuring out, and sometimes saying, "Hey, you need to go see a doctor."
yeah,
You
even
know?
even if you have dual military, parents, right?
Yeah.
Now the kid's sick or the kid breaks their arm, I know that Angie and Paul went through a scare when Thatcher fell down. I remember when Paul got the call, he fell down
Yeah.
off his bike,
Uh-huh.
and now he had to go through different doctor's appointments, CAT scans, all that kind of, and Angie and Paul, you know, they have a great family, great kids.
Yeah.
Thatch on the Air Force.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So he joined up
Not the
and
army.
no, I think he went into. I
Yeah.
think he went into the Air Force.
Yeah, that's good.
He saw what the Army did to his. He immediately went from 65 years old when he joined, and he's 65. you know,
Yeah.
Shout out to Paul Deese and Angie there. You guys are amazing. Second family to me.
But his energy levels are through the
Yeah,
roof.
it's through
I
the
don't know if
roof.
that man ever sleep when we were in the
No,
field.
no. He
God
has
bless
a
that man.
he has like this reverse fountain of youth that he's just stays at old man status the whole time,
Yeah.
and the thing is like he embraces it,
Yeah.
there's times where you go through and we sing cadences of pain in my back, like as you're running and stuff.
Yeah.
The issue is that's our body saying we probably shouldn't run right now.
Right.
We joke about it now, and
Or that you need to drink more water, So
yeah, and take
take an Advil.
take an Advil, ibuprofen 800, but you're talking about a dude who's actually down in Fort Sill running home of artillery at the school down there, training new soldiers and leaders, of experience that he had in the military, and he's going to be looking at a transition out and retiring. I think it's either this year or next year,
Mhm.
retirement from the military.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a big loss for the army, man.
it
What a
is,
great
yeah,
non-commissioned officer.
yeah. He's a
awesome.
good dude. Just through
Yeah, and
and
a good dude. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, just
Just a total
through.
bro.
Yeah, yeah. He's broing it down in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Speaking of Oklahoma, with my sponsor Sky Hunter Outfitters, we definitely got to be able to go down there at some point, and go shoot some hogs off the side of a
What does
helicopter.
that mean, though? I've heard like the advertisement and whatnot. Like,
So Sky,
you're in a helicopter and
yeah. So
you're shooting it.
yeah. So Brandy Rector is a former Marine.
Yeah.
Door gunner, 2 deployments to Afghanistan. She runs
yeah.
a helicopter hog hunting company down in Oklahoma, and I think she's got 2 helicopters now. So her and the team down there, better owned and operated. You go on a hog hunt down there. Feral hogs are an issue, So it's killing 2 birds with 1 stone. She's helping her community out, the
Yeah.
farmers in the area. She's developed a veteran-owned business, to pay her bills or extra, money or whatever the case may be. Doing something awesome,
Right. Yeah.
how many people can say that I signed up, you don't even have to be military, you go and you pay and you jump in the side of a helicopter and you go shoot hogs,
Yeah.
and fly around Oklahoma and it's pretty, weapons included, ammo's included, the
Yeah.
flights included, all in that price. And by the time you get done, it's, if you never served in the military, then you got kind of an experience of, those special operators, hanging off the side of a helicopter,
Right. Yeah.
you can throw your tactical gear on, like not the tactical, the tactical,
Okay.
Yeah, you can throw that Amazon.
So I can put all those patches on.
Yeah, throw the patches on. Embrace
that I wasn't allowed to wear while.
embrace the sock.
Right.
And throw that multicam camo hat on that you bought off of Amazon. And act like you're you're on a operating team, you know, and
Yeah.
a full blown operator
I
at the
got
side.
I got my plate carriers, man. Like
Yeah.
I don't have plates.
Yeah, I picked you up from the airport with my plate carrier in the back of the car. I forgot it was in the back of the car. But I just say,
Yeah.
you know, carry it around. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I definitely at some point I definitely want to get down there, home of artillery, you know, and down in
Right.
Oklahoma. And
Yeah.
I did my basic and AIT there, you know, so it kind of came full circle for me. Yes, and I have this awesome freaking veteran-owned operating company that is sponsoring Everlasting Veteran,
Yeah.
and getting this message out and pushing this mission forward and helping other veterans. And they're huge doing that down in Oklahoma as well. And also supporting first responders in her community in Idabel, Oklahoma. You know, and I point this out because, you know, my brother-in-law down in Florida, so he's got Eagle Eyes Apparel. He's a former Marine. And in the clothing, the military clothing realm, Grunt Style is the
I see that
owner
all
of that
over, man.
owner of that area, right? Grunt Style.
Yeah.
It's got a cool, they got great graphics.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I actually got Alan Chasen and Ed Ford coming on tomorrow for the show. They got a book, Postcards Through Hell, and it's their first-hand experience as contractors delivering the mail through Afghanistan and
That's
Iraq.
crazy. Yeah.
You know, and pushing that mail forward.
Yeah.
And I
You
saw
don't even think about stuff like that.
right,
You know?
and so I watched
There's so much going on.
yeah, I watched the trailer that Grunt Style did. Grunt Style has a podcast called American Grit.
Yeah.
But they obviously they have a lot more money, better equipment than I do. You know, I'm like subpar to, you know, medium well. You know, we just
Yeah.
had steak last night. So
Yeah.
I'm like a mile as far as like equipment and
If
stuff.
this doesn't work for you, you'd always open a restaurant, man.
Yeah.
I do.
Right. You know, and I watched the trailer for Postcards Through Hell, you know, and Alan sent it to me. He sent, you know, he's been on other podcasts, but they launched their book last year, and the first podcast was Grunt Style's American Grit.
Yeah.
So they created this trailer, and I'm watching this, and I've known Alan for a few years now, and it's just recently we kind of connected on Facebook again because I created a separate account for like just business because I didn't want to overflow my family Facebook page where we keep in contact with family members, post stuff about the family, clog that up. So he sends me a message. He goes, Ryan Landry, aka Ryan and Heather. I'm like, yeah, it's me, dude. He's like, dude, I didn't know you had a podcast. I said, hey, you know, what are you doing? You know, I'd love to have you on, your experiences, because I've already talked to him.
Yeah.
You know, he was Alan Chasen. You know, he was a Navy corpsman. Got out. He was a medic on a SWAT team down in Texas. You know, and Ed Ford contacted him to be the med guy for the teams that they would run. And you know, through Afghanistan, they had their trucks and their mission was delivering, you know, and they talk about it. If you go to Google it, Postcards Through Hell, you know, they briefly talk about their experience of, you know, not having the military support. We roll out on convoys. We got, you know, fixed wings, rotary, you know, you name it, artillery, you know, throw a shell over here, you know, I need this over here. And you have those resources readily available. Then you dive into the private contractor realm of things. And it's like the OK Corral, you know, like it is like the Wild West. And it's a side of the war people don't really know existed, you know, because
I didn't know that was going on at all. I mean, like I got my mail, but I didn't think about like how it got to me.
You get your care package, you know, and it's got you know, maybe your log dip and you know, some you know, notes or whatever the case may be from family members or friends that sent you stuff. You know, at the time DVDs were still a big thing, you know, DVDs and hard drives, you know, and watching movies on your downtime when you had some time. I actually had the Aussies downloaded the old Nintendo for the computer though. So I was able to play like Super Mario, you know, and I had I had a USB controller that was similar to the old Nintendo.
Similar.
And I was able to play like Super Mario on my computer. I thought it was like the cool thing. But yeah, they're going to be coming on tomorrow, and we're going to be laying down just as good as the episode today. And it's just going to be a different insight of they were veterans, and they served with veterans. There was contractors with them, and what stresses, the losses, because they dealt with combat just like the military did over there, And if I remember correctly, Ed talks about being in Iraq versus Afghanistan and the two separate wars. Iraq, they're lobbing stuff at you. Afghanistan, they're there to fight.
Yeah.
Right? They're there in your face, small arms a lot of the time.
Yeah, complex attacks.
Yeah, complex attacks, IEDs, VBIDs, all that kind of stuff. Putting stuff in the ground and remote detonating, cell phones, all that kind of stuff. And I listened to these guys talking about it, and I'm like, man, there's going to be so many people that are going to be able to relate to this. Even the guys that were private contractors that never served in the military but signed up to be a private contractor and deployed just like a military personnel would.
Yeah.
Now they're coming back with the same effects of war, but
PTSD and stuff.
PTSD, anxiety, all that stuff, and they're dealing with that transition back to the civilian world, but they don't have, we complain about the lack of support in which we have as veterans. Well, they don't have a VA.
No.
Right. And because their time as a contractor doesn't fall under military time. Right. But they're dealing with the same stuff. How do you get through that? You know what I mean?
No, that's interesting too, because it's like it's so quickly. Like if you see someone in uniform, at least for me, like I thank them for their service, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, they're doing some really patriotic stuff. You know what I mean? Look at that. Like and like, but you don't really think to say thank you for your service.
Yeah.
For the contractors that are overseas.
I thought it was pretty cool too. Is like, so they have a patch and it's like these jacked horses, like these horses that, benching like 400 and curling like
horses.
Yeah. So
like
they're
stallions.
Yeah. Just studs,
Yeah.
And so they have these horses with M4s and they're called the Pony Express. I'm like that is awesome, and just getting that insight. Because they're a veteran, they know military service, but also they have the the knowledge and the experience being a private contractor in that side of the war that people don't know about.
Yeah.
So it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah. I bet.
So, and I think that, I tell everybody that comes on the show, this is mini series, it's like a never ending episode, and we talked about the name, Everlasting Veteran. There's many other veteran organizations that use Everlasting, and then it's Everlasting Medical, Everlasting, like Everlasting. I think there's a kind of a memoir of your military service, remembering the ones that served, remembering the ones that we lost, our brothers and sisters that paid the ultimate sacrifice, and if you say their name, their service means something, it's respected. And I talk about that till Valhalla, I talked about that and the knock that gave them wings. That was a very hard episode that, because I brought up feelings of losing a brother far after coming back from deployment, where I didn't realize, and I had no clue, he become lost kind of along the way. And we lost Eugene Porterfield, 2nd Cav brother. And it was one of those things where, until I laid down that episode, I almost didn't completely heal from it. It was an open wound that I was dealing with, and we talked about, I write down things in my phone of, this is my camo, I think it's an important aspect as far as transition goes, is talking about those experiences, talking about, unfortunately there's so many people, so many veterans that go through transition different, the stresses afterwards, dealing with their service connected stuff afterwards as well. Being a police officer, seeing that firsthand as a responding officer dealing with a veteran in crisis,
Yeah.
gave me a different perspective, and it really it launched this podcast. People can understand my mindset, where I'm coming from, and hopefully it helps another veteran.
Yeah.
So
No, I think, I mean, like, here's one right here, man. Like
yeah,
the stuff that you were saying in the first like 2 or 3 podcasts that I listened to, like they were all monologues, and
yeah,
it's like, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Like I connected with so much of the things that you were saying.
yeah.
And yeah, I
I
think like
appreciate that.
anyone like going through transition, like, listen would benefit them for sure.
Yeah,
And also like the people who've already, and I think you say like transition never really ends,
right.
right? It's everlasting or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, I think those people too are gonna, benefit from it.
yeah,
But what's interesting is like, so I talked about how I went through the SFL TAP program at Fort Hood.
right,
Pretty
right.
good experience, right? And um, they have this one pro called Boot Business. Being an entrepreneur, you
Yeah,
go through this. I think it's like a 2-day program, and there's an lead instructor, and then he has other instructors come in and they talk based off of different like specialties and whatnot.
right.
And at the end, though, and whatnot,
Hmm.
thanks for going through the program. He said something to the effect of, um, a lot of people will say when you transition out of the military, you're transitioning it to plan.
Hmm.
And what he says is that's not a factual statement. And when you first, raise your hand and swear the oath to defend the ideal, right, to defend our Constitution,
Yeah, against enemies, foreign and
you
domestic.
will never be a civilian again.
Right.
That's it.
It's an oath. It's an oath that doesn't have an
Right.
expiration.
And so you swear that oath, you serve your time, no matter how short or how long it is, you leave service, you are now a veteran, and you
Right.
were always a veteran.
Yeah.
And like you'll never go back. And I think you talked about it yesterday,
Yeah.
like with like the rewiring of the brain and what you go through with whatever basic training or
Right.
initial training coming in the military, like
Yeah.
you are forever changed.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
there's no civilian. It's
Yeah.
you
And I
are a
think
veteran.
I think a big takeaway from that is also regaining that purpose. We talked about the
Yeah.
dopamine dump, and
Yeah.
and fulfilling your purpose gives you that, pleasure, that pleasure drug, the dopamine dump of, I did something, I accomplished something, and regaining that purpose is, and having a purpose, knowing what that purpose is in the
Yeah.
military. You have to start, taking it on yourself to, what can I do to better my life or better somebody else's life? What's my focus now? How am I going to be able to effectively change my life, or effectively transition my life that's now changed because of my military service? And I talk about it all the time, and I'll continue to talk about it. You can't be your best version of yourself for somebody else if you're not the best version of yourself for you first.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and especially being a police officer, or you have that drive of service to help other. We talked about it, a little bit ago. Um, you take people take your advice, and sometimes we don't take our own advice, and we have to have self reflection and self awareness. And I really like the idea of being self aware, of knowing your purpose and pushing forward. But we also have to reflect on, is what we're doing um, promoting change, promoting helping other veterans? And if it's not, how do we readjust? And that's where the self-awareness comes from,
Yeah.
adapting something to what you're doing, and then effectively making changes if you need to, and shifting gears, to make sure you're continuing to affect change.
Right.
And I think that's a big thing, as far as you can do it as just a veteran yourself, but you have to do it first yourself before you start doing it for others. because I show up to work. We talked about it multiple times, and I talk about it all the time. Even if you're a police officer, firefighter, any type of first responder, doctor, nurse, those problems that you have in your life, are left outside to deal with others' problems. And it's a difficult situation day in and day out. Your transition is almost a daily occurrence because you're going to a possible high stress shift. You don't know what to expect. So
Right.
you're already here, top of everything, expecting the worst. And then, or you go in and things have been somewhat calm, and that's how things have kind of been run. And then all of a sudden you get that high adrenaline filled call, and just recently of active shooter, or you guy with a knife or active domestic. And then, the adrenaline dump hits, you kind of calm down, and then you got to transition back. You get off shift and you come back to your family that, of them, especially if none of them have ever served in the military or been in a role. Wife works for Pfizer, and works on a computer and does numbers and stuff like that. So, there's other stresses that go along with that job,
Right.
but there's no stresses.
Deadlines, accuracy,
Yeah,
all
there's
that.
no
Yeah.
stresses that deal with those adrenaline filled highs.
Right.
And then that on that high, and there's been times I've come home from work and you're still on that adrenaline high and you can't go to sleep now.
Right.
Right. Not because you're going to have nightmares or fear of anything. It's just that adrenaline dump, and the adrenaline dump hasn't really hit you yet sometimes. And now you're transitioning back to being with your family,
Yeah.
stressful situations. I'll be like, oh, work is fine, because I felt like I probably shouldn't indulge on how I'm feeling and what's going on with work on her, because I don't want her to have stress or, whatever the case may be based on my, and the same thing applies to the military. If you have a spouse that's transitioned out, the other one's still in, or one of the spouses are not, they come back from the deployment, you're not going to give full blown details,
Yeah.
But there needs to be some little compromise back and forth. That is the person that you either open up the most to, because they're in your daily activities, so they can properly be able to accept the person that you are based on the changes that happen in the environment in which you're placed in. Whether it's
That's well said, man.
whether it's deployment,
Yeah.
dealing with somebody with a gun, going to that car accident in the family of four, are killed in the car accident. What first responders fire. A lot of people look at firefighters; they just go and they hose off a building, right? Well, what happens when they go in after everything's all said and done, and there's that charred body.
Right.
Did they do everything possible to make sure they tried to save that person's life? There's guilt associated with it.
Right.
Ambulance crews. I talked to a former pilot for Lifestar a couple days ago. And he'd been a medic in the medical field for 25 years, and then got with Lifestar, and he was, one of their medics on Lifestar, which is a medical helicopter in the civilian world, that if your injuries are so severe, they'll sometimes land on the roadway, put you into the helicopter, fly you instead of going ground. And talking to him with some of his stories and stuff that he's gone through, and we all can relate to having that transition when you're done with your shift, not just done with a career of dealing with the darkness of the world and stuff that most people will never see in their entire life. And I thought it was interesting, because I feel like the two worlds can relate a little bit in that aspect,
Yeah.
and how that transition, and talking to your spouse through stuff so they can accept the new you that's been changed,
Right. Yeah.
So,
Because if you don't talk about it, like, you don't. I don't
yeah.
know. I just don't feel like you move on and figure
Yeah.
things out from it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It takes time to sort some stuff out.
Yeah.
Especially
Absolutely.
like during those high stress situations, if you made a mistake,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
something you could have done better, or
Yeah.
communicated better.
Or you did everything possible in the moment, and then you start Monday morning quarterbacking and second guessing everything that you
what you
did,
did. Yeah.
you know, and or you
Yeah.
got the Monday morning quarterback that, you know, is seeing it from the outside perspective that was never there, you know, and
Right.
then you start second guessing yourself.
Right.
Because now they're kind of Monday morning quarterbacking it, and you're like, oh shit, I could have done this, you know, I could have done that. Well, you're dealing with a high stress situation, and you did it to the best of your ability based on that
Yeah.
moment.
I
You
think
know,
that helps. If you've done it to the best of your ability, you overcome to whatever fear you had,
yeah,
that can help with the coping.
yeah, yeah.
But I
Yep.
think there's still this stress when you make those mistakes.
Exactly. We're going to wrap this up as far as veterans when they come back from deployments, and you know, you have those zonks from the first sergeant, you know, where you get
Yeah.
back from the deployment and the first sergeant goes zonk, you know, and all the civilians listening right now are gonna be like, zonk,
What's he
like,
talking about?
you know, is essentially just, you know,
And
get
then like
get
all
the
the
hell
other
out of here.
listeners who know what you're saying about probably left already.
Yeah.
They're running away.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They're,
Zonk.
yeah, they're already home. They
They're
turn
done.
off their speaker, you know, and it's just get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
You know, you earn some downtime. You know, you that decompression time, because you were just on a deployment. You know, and that lasts for, you know, a few weeks, a month, 2 months, or whatever the case may be, and then you start that transition as a military member back into mission readiness and the garrison life. You know, and there's multiple different layers to that as well. Now there's, we're bored, let's come up with more rules, you know. what can we do?
Yeah.
What can we do? It's not, you know, like let's come up with a rule where your uniform changes to this, you know. And I heard from some guys that still continue to serve that at one point they were like, well, people's feelings are hurt, they feel left out because they can't wear a deployment patch because they haven't deployed yet.
Really?
Yeah. And I went,
That's now?
not now. I know this. I had this conversation a couple years back, so I don't know if it's a thing that's in place or
Okay.
it was just talked about, you know, and it was going to happen. But it's like you got guys that like deployed or have been on multiple deployments, you know, and there's guys that I serve with Second Cav that, you know, they'll have the Cav patch, but then they have you know, a unit that wasn't Second Cav, you know, even though they deploy with Second Cav, they'll still wear that unit because they're connected to the bond
Yeah.
on that deployment, you know, and maybe it just is their first deployment, you know, whatever the case may be. um you know, and I kind of was taken back by it. I'm like, you know, why is the military going, all right, their feelings are hurt, you know, like, no, go out and earn it. You know,
Yeah.
you serve, right? Your timing just wasn't there. You
Right.
know, you can't take away what others have done and earned just because you feel left out.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I feel like it was maybe a generational switch. You know, of
Like the millennials and Gen Zers.
yeah, one of those things where like, you know, they feel left out and
Yeah.
their feelings are hurt. And the other day at work I actually pulled up the hurt feelings report. It's similar to the monthly counseling. It says like hurt feelings report, and it was in a joking manner, you know, between a coworker and you know, both got a good laugh out because reading the boxes on it, it's like somebody stole my lunch. Where do your feelings hurt? Arm, right arm, all over. It's designed, you know, please put the whiner's name, you know, like one
Yeah.
of those things, a morale booster. You know, but this is some of the stuff that, you know, current service members are dealing with right now.
Yeah.
And it's not really mainstream media, you know, in your face type of thing. The military is consistently evolving where people are coming in, people that we're seeing in the civilian world, the lack of motivation to, you know, and having good work ethic. and pushing yourself, not because somebody else is kicking you in the ass to do so.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's kind of a somewhat of a disconnect going on with that right now in society.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know if it's I mean, every generation seems to have that to
Yeah.
some extent, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
the Vietnam
um,
guys look at us as soft,
as soft,
Yeah.
right? They're
Yeah.
loosening standards and everything else. And I
Yeah.
don't know if it's just like the evolution of things that are going to change.
Yeah.
But like I mean, like the army is a good example, right? Like they need to be able to recruit people, right? We need a
Right.
certain amount of people coming in based off the value organization, and then
Correct.
once those values are identified, we hire and fire based off that, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it has to attract people to come in. So
Yeah.
if the generation is changing, the army has to change with it to a certain extent. But we
Correct.
don't want it to change too much because we don't want to lose the standards and discipline that we've already created.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
don't know where we're at with that. I hear the same thing about
Yeah.
like Gen Zers and millennials. I'm actually a millennial,
Yeah.
right? I was born in 1983. I've heard some people say that's not it. That is,
Yeah.
but like generally
We're
speaking,
Yeah,
like
we're at the tail end of it,
I think, yeah,
or the beginning of
the
it. I mean,
beginning. We're the older millennials.
yeah.
Yeah.
We are the elders.
We are the elders. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if I really feel a lot of the things they say about millennials, like as far as like, the whole trophy thing. Like everyone got I did a trophy for not like being a champion, but we always, whenever we did do well, like we'd also get the trophy.
First in participation.
First in participation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't feel like I connect with a lot of things that you see in social media
Yeah.
about millennials. And I think it's a generalization that people have made, and it gets a lot of views and whatnot.
Yeah.
But like there are a lot of purpose driven millennials that are very good and
Yeah.
high
Absolutely.
achievers. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like so.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things. It's the vision or views may be different, but they still have a similar work ethic to push themselves.
Yeah.
They may not share exactly the same values, or standards, but they still have the same work ethic to be successful.
Yeah.
And I think as a whole, we need to. The same thing goes, when the elders of our generation, turn off that rap music, turn off, like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Bobby Shea Mama saying that's the devil,
Yeah.
and I think it's one of those things where, and having older stepchildren myself as a stepfather, I face those struggles sometimes, as their stepfather, one, and two, there's just there's going to be a disconnect,
Yeah.
the understanding of the culture that is involved to what it is today. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of those things where we also need to take the proper steps to evolve. We don't need to change who we are, but we also need to understand that it's a generational change. Technology is a big thing. The social media platforms that exist now weren't the same when we were growing up.
No.
The ways of communication. I feel like there's, the younger generation was able to fare the pandemic better because they've developed their social interactions based on social media and how that,
Yeah.
that's a topic for a different day as far as how
Right.
how that evolves. The generation today, but well, I just want to appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely have to do part two, at some point as well. And
So we're gonna call that repeat.
repeat. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the Fire for Effect. If people don't know, repeat in the artillery world is send me some more.
Yeah.
Like I want some more rounds, the same location.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah, and pull string, go boom.
Yeah.
So all my second cab brothers out there, George Koss here on Everlasting Veteran. I appreciate you guys for listening. This is Everlasting Veteran, and I am your host, Ryan Landry, aka Wind Talker. I want to extend a shout out and an appreciation to Sky Hunter Outfitters as well, who's sponsoring Everlasting Veteran. through this season, and also my brother-in-law with Eagle Eyes Apparel down in Florida, veteran-owned and operated company who actually partnered with Survive First that helps first responders and their families through. So thank you for listening. This is Everlasting.